Good morning. Thanks for joining today's Test Studio webinar. This is Andy Wheeland. I'll be conducting the demonstration today. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. Looks like a few folks are still filing in, but there's tons to cover here. So I'm going to jump through some slides real quick, and then we'll spend the majority of the time actually going through Test Studio. The first couple things I want to go through is just kind of show you what we consider our best approach when utilizing Test Studio. There's a lot of different layers to it. There's a lot of different access points for it. A lot of different things you could do with our suite of really testing capabilities. But basically, we're going to focus this particular webinar on the functional automation aspects of it, and essentially how best we can create and maintain codeless test automation with Test Studio. First thing I want to point out here is sort of the day in the life of the QA and QA team, essentially after rolling out automation. This is assuming at this point you've got essentially, fast forward and you've got suites or test lists of tests, regression tests in lists that you've created, and you can schedule these lists to run automatically on a nightly basis, or you could have these running as part of a continuous integration or continuous improvement type of approach with your development process. And there's many different build servers we work with. But any way you go, this is sort of the day in the life of, or the day after you start this automation rollout. One of the first ways we interact with Test Studio on a daily basis is via email notification. As we schedule the test list to execute, it includes the ability to have email notifications sent to a group of people and include attachments with result data, so that way you can easily just identify where you stand. If you think about, you've got tests, you've got a release that may be coming out over the weekend, it pushes to UAT, tests are kicked off, and you may be on the sideline of your kid's soccer game and you get an email that says, hey, the test list just ran and here's where we stand. And that can tell you if you need immediately to go back to work or if you can enjoy your weekend, right? So here in the screenshots, you can see an example of one of these email notifications, the overall pass-fail. I mean, just in the subject line alone, you get a lot of great information. What list ran, the overall pass-fail of the list, the timestamp of when it ran, the breakdown of pass-fail, and then which machine it ran against. So keep in mind, oftentimes we're going to have labs of machines. We may be receiving a lot of these notifications from the different machines that are running our test lists. We'll talk about those labs and how those work as well. But essentially, in this email, you also have 3 different attachments. So you can modify or determine what type of attachments you want to include in the email. Excel and Word for those that don't have a result viewer, or for anybody that has a Test Studio license or even a runtime license, has the test viewer, and they can use our proprietary AII results file, which we'll see later on in the show. Up front here, you see step failure details. So really what this does, when we provide the ability to start the day by looking at the results, it's a great thing, right? Because that means we just saved all the time it takes to test. For those of you that are manually testing, that's the goal. We want to make this something that can run while you're sleeping or while you're busy doing other things, so that you don't have to waste the time on all of those scenarios that you have to run every time there's a new release. And there's this catch-22 within the QA world, where as soon as you complete something successfully, it's as if you wasted that time, because we're looking for failure. So if things pass, then we're almost sad in a way. But in reality, we want our applications to be good. We want our software to be strong. That's why we're here. That's why we do what we do. So instead of wasting time on what's succeeding, this setup and this format allows us to focus on the failure, really target the failure, what's not working. So essentially, as we start our day, we can review results from a list, we can drill down, target the failure, review the failure details, which is here on the foreground, showing us a lot of data that we capture, and we'll take a look at an example of this in a little bit. But a lot of data that's captured automatically for you when a failure occurs, that can be easily communicated to a bug tracking system or even to our own support, okay? This creates a feedback loop. One of those great buzzwords people love to talk about, but this is actually what it is. It's a real example of a feedback loop, not just some buzzwords. Because essentially now you've got a QA team that's capturing very valid, very useful data. And again, we'll go into more details on all that data that's in there, but you can get a feel for some of the log links there, the images, the DOM, that kind of stuff that we're capturing. And it makes the QAs empowered because now they can directly communicate this to the team or get assistance if they need it from our support. So there's two ways that this data can help you, either with a test issue where you may need our support, and that's a big benefit of having Test Studio, is having engineer level 24-hour guaranteed response time support. It's hard to get that with a lot of other products that are on the market. Either their support is exhaustively painful or not present. In some of those open source cases, there is no support, or you're left to going through forums. We've got forums too, but it's more for our community to share and communicate and not a crutch for our support, because we actually do have a support team of engineers that can help you. So this is great information. It allows us to really share this information, whether it's a test issue, as I mentioned, or whether it's an application issue, and that's the whole goal. We want to find bugs and report those, so we can do that very easily. Continuous integrations listed here. Jenkins is just one example of where we do that, but again, we're empowering the QAs, we're inviting them into the application lifecycle, and we're promoting them to be more of a useful resource in the process. And essentially, we're also taking the bottleneck out of the testing, which oftentimes is what is keeping us from actually being agile. So for those of you that have been chasing the mythical agile creature, getting into automation and having a successful automation a lot of times is the backbone of making sure you can be agile and keep up and shift and change and move as you need to from iteration to iteration. All right, what's going on behind the scenes with Test Studio is this sophisticated flexible find logic. And what this means is how we locate buttons, inputs, fields, all the stuff that you want to interact with on your application, how we actually locate that. A lot of tools out there are using indexes, are using XPaths, they're using XY coordinates. I've seen some that are using screenshot images. I don't even know how that works. But what we do is something much more powerful, much more sophisticated, because we look for the elements based off of reliable properties. And the best example of this is presented here in our project settings, where you can actually customize and manipulate the find logic strategy of Test Studio. You're basically dictating to Test Studio how to locate the elements best for your application under test. If you're in Angular applications, you might have identifiers like ng-model, ng-data, ng-something, right? Those can be added to this list. They can be promoted to the top of the list, because the other thing this provides is not just a search mechanism to find your elements consistently across browser over time and create reliability, but also it creates a backup search mechanism. So you're telling Test Studio the best way to find my elements in my application is maybe by an automation ID. This, of course, is when the developers are building the application with test automation in mind, and they're actually creating an ID through the development process that's there for us on the testing side to look for, that's static, that's reliable, it's something that we can reliably locate elements with throughout the application, or that's its definition. It shouldn't be a dynamic type of ID in this case. So you can tell Test Studio that's the best way to go. If that's not there, look for this. If that's not there, keep going down this list. You can prioritize content, text content, or inner text. That's what the users are looking at. When I want to look for a cancel button on a screen, I can use the text content, which is the label on the button, just like a user does, right? So that's another method. In my case, that's my third option on the list, but in your case, it may not be. There may be other identifiers. So this is key and critical to making sure you have success with Test Studio. We'll work on this a little bit. Over here, you can see an individual element and how it's being identified, in this case, by the label on the button combined with the tag name. What type of field is it? It's an anchor, and it's got a text content of login. That's essentially how we can locate the login button. And guess what? This logic holds up across browser. I can also data drive this logic if I need to. You can imagine clicking login on a test that's running English, and then a second iteration of that test clicks the Spanish version or the French version of login. So there's a lot of powerful things we can do with this approach, but ideally, and most of all, it's the maintenance of the tests and the elements within the test is done easily, it's done codelessly, it's very sophisticated, and it provides a lot of reliability. All right, we've got things for you in here to work with chain find expressions, dynamic data. There's lots of powerful capabilities we can do within that. Grids that people always have trouble with. We've got great solutions for grids. We also reuse a lot of things and make the maintenance of those elements very easy as well. We'll show you some of that along the way. Now, what's Test Studio good for? Well, of course, we're going to promote some of our own. So if you're using Kendo UI or using Sitefinity, our WPF controls, our Silverlight controls, we're one of the only and best automation tools for Silverlight if you're still using that. iOS, we of course have our mobile testing for iOS. Role-based, if you're using our Progress role-based, you can use our Test Studio for that. Our Android UI controls, our Ajax, ASP.NET Ajax controls, and here's some examples of some of the products and companies we work with as well. Things like Microsoft Dynamics CRM, a very useful tool. We work with Microsoft hand in hand on a lot of projects. Here's another example of a company that has some very modern capabilities, video players that we can automate with Test Studio, with HBO Go there. Bank of America, line of business applications that are critical to maintaining their organization and making sure people get the support and represent their company as needed. ESPN, back of the house, front of the house, all great things that work with Test Studio essentially, and a lot of our other products as well. So we talk about codeless tests and codeless test maintenance. How do we achieve that? We already saw that the flexible find logic makes it a very sophisticated way to locate elements, a very different way than a lot of tools, but that way allows us to have more reliability. It also, when coupled with a maintenance process that's tuned for a codeless test, you can maintain these things codelessly. That means we don't necessarily have to have developer skills to create and to maintain. That's the important part, maintain these tests. There are tools that allow us to create tests codelessly. That allow us to easily record tests, but oftentimes you end up with code that comes out of it, and it requires a developer skill to maintain that. Whereas with Test Studio, it can be created and it can be maintained codelessly over time. Now, I emphasize this, but if you like to code, you have everything you need. You can code in C# or VB.NET. We have a built-in IDE within our standalone environment. We've just added some enhancements to make it even nicer and easier for coders. You've got also the Visual Studio plugin on top of our standalone environment. I mean, there's no limit to what you can do with the coding. It's just like any other coded framework. But what we've done is built a process and a bunch of tools on top of that so that you don't have to code. And essentially you'll see in the later slide how we prioritize our solutions. But here you can see just a couple screenshots to show you where an element's being edited. We've got some tools to run to certain points, jump in and edit tests very easily, edit elements against the live UI. You'll see that in a few moments. And then when updating and saving those elements to the project, we can apply it across all of the tests that use that particular element. So universal element maintenance. When I talk about grids, just real quickly, and we'll show you some examples of this, we have a lot of ability within grids, especially if they are our own grids. Now, I should make it clear, we don't just work with our own tech. We work with anything really that shows up in a web page or WPF applications, Silverlight, as I mentioned, out of browser or in browser, and of course, as it stands today, native iOS and native Android applications, which will at the end of this month be expanding to mobile web as well. Lots going on in the mobile arena. But when it does come to using Telerik controls, you do get an added bonus. You have the ability to really do more, and there's a small example here in the middle that shows some additional Kendo grid verification options that basically allow us to verify the status or the settings of a grid without even having to exercise that. They're basically just provided through our translators, which are here on the right. The translators are guarantees that say, hey, we know how to work with these controls because, of course, they're ours. And there's a set of generic translators for third party and for custom controls too. So we absolutely can work with the custom and the third party, but when it comes to our own controls, we can do even greater and give you guarantee that it's going to work very well. And really the best testing tool for things like Kendo and Sifinity is Test Studio. All right, we'll show you a little bit of this Kendo grid exercise or how we work with dynamic grid situations to really make you believers. A couple more slides here real quick and then we'll jump in. This is an important one. It talks about our approach. We have 4 solutions to every problem in Test Studio. And the first solution is to hit record and do what a user does. And you'll see it will capture your steps, it will capture your actions, it will capture your elements as well using that sophisticated fine logic, right? Just point and click. Keep in mind there's a giant asterisk at the end of this because this is assuming you have tuned Test Studio's ID logic strategy. We're going to talk about this over and over because it's critically important to understand that Test Studio is highly flexible and it needs to be adjusted for each product. Every product is different. Every application is different. So we need to adjust it to make sure that it works and understands the behaviors of an Angular JS application versus the way a Silverlight application might work, or the identifiers that are available in a XAML-based application versus those that might be available in a JS type application or an HTML5 or PHP or MVVM or whatever it may be. So you can tailor Test Studio and tune those settings, and after that's done, it makes it super easy to hit record and do what a user does and get very reliable tests out of that are very easy to maintain. If that doesn't work, then we have the ability to build a step. In some cases, maybe it's a little bit more difficult to capture something from a basic playback and record. So we can build a step. We can build very advanced verifications. We can build element to element drag and drop steps that will dynamically move in the place that they need to go to make that drag and drop happen because they're looking for elements, not coordinates, right? Now, if we need to, if we can't build a step to get away with it, then we can go to location-based interactions. And this is where most of the other tools live. Your XPaths, your XY coordinates, your indexes, your tabs, really, your image-based things, those all live in this kind of level 3 world. We have 2 solutions before we ever have to resort to that. And then if that doesn't work, then we code it, right? So we have 3 ways to do this codelessly for every situation that before we have to actually code it. So we really try to minimize that impact on the development team so they can focus on developing new functionality for our beautiful product. And from the QA team, we can cover all of the technology and all of the requirements necessary to improve the product, as well as creating that feedback loop without having to learn how to develop, right? Manual testers, you're in a good spot with Test Studio because you have a tool that's got a very low learning curve to get you started, and you don't have to learn a development language to do it. All right, last slide, I promise. Reuse. This is a theme throughout Test Studio, and every time you can reuse something means you've saved yourself some maintenance cost and time and pain. So we reuse elements. We have a global element maintenance. You'll see that. That's our codeless maintenance capabilities, right? All of the tests that use an element will share the element. So when we go to update the element, it will allow us to apply that across all the tests. We don't have to go to individual scripts and do find and replace. We can basically universally manage that in a codeless way. We reuse tests cross-browser because our fine logic is based off of the strong properties, the reliable properties of your elements. then we have tests that can run cross-browser. So I can have one test that I record in Firefox or Chrome, and I can play this test back reliably against IE, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and get lots of results and lots of mileage out of that. Reuse of tests across different deployment environments. We use a function called base URL, where I might record a bunch of tests on a locally installed version of my application, and then as it moves through the different deployment phases, I can simply swap out a test list level setting and run the same exact tests against a different environment. There's a lot of mileage we're gaining out of these tests now. So as you move from UAT, staging to production, you can rerun the same test list that passed on staging once it gets to production to make sure that final move, that final deployment step is done and clean, and the customers are getting the best experience out of the application. Reuse of tests with another test. Common functions can easily be called in what we call test as step. There's lots of really cool things you could do with test as step. Modularize your test components and bring them together to do a lot of really awesome functions, right? And then reuse of functional test as performance and load test. So you may be here for functional testing, and that's oftentimes where people will begin. If you think about the stages of an application, as we build it, we want to make sure that we can exercise it correctly, that it works as prescribed, that if we type in a username and password that's valid, we can actually get it in to the application, right? So functionally, testing usually comes first, and it's something that needs to continue to happen, under regression tests as well, to make sure that we don't break things as we create new things. But the benefits of Test Studio provide you the ability to take that same functional test when you're ready and say, let's look at the performance. Let's analyze method level data and the order of operations to see where the bottlenecks are in our login process. So you rerun the same test as a perf test, or even rerun it in a load test and say, now how is it if we log in with 1,000 users at the same time, right? So again, reliability, mileage, lots of mileage out of these tests. And then of course reuse, I don't know why I threw that in, but copy paste of tests and steps. It's really easy to edit these things. So let's show you that part of it. Now a lot of people show up to these sessions with live trials, or you may leave today's session and start up a trial if you don't have one already. So I want to talk about the settings. We've mentioned a few of them, but I want to show you where things are, because UIs change, and I've got a video even that is a bit out of date with some of these settings, at least where they are. So I want to go through a few of them for you. This is our starting screen. You've probably seen this, where you'll see your recent projects. You can create or open a project. Get started, I do want to point out, has a couple of videos in here, one for web and desktop, one for mobile. Also, our software update page is important as well. This is going to show you what version you're on, which is essentially currently our latest release that came out on the 29th of February. And you can see, if you haven't seen version numbers like this before, this is essentially the third major release of 2015's internal build that came out on the 14th month of 2015, if that makes sense. And the 14th month of 2015 is really February 29th, 2016. But this is a continuation of last year's third official build, that .3 there. So our next release is going to be at the end of March, and that will be our 2016.1. whatever date that comes out. Okay, stay tuned for that. Lots of good stuff happening with that. And of course, we have a very agile method internally. Guess what? We dog food our applications here at Telerik and at Progress, which allows us to be agile, and that's what we want to empower you guys to do as well. Or if you're doing waterfall, that's fine too. You can still be fast. So one of the things I want to point out is that we put out updates because we're agile, and we have to keep updated with the latest browser versions. So a big benefit of having a product that, one, has world-class support, but two, from a maintenance cost or from a maintenance price standpoint, you're getting updates every 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, so we can stay up with the latest browser versions as they're changing. Firefox and Chrome have been notorious for this, and actually now with IE's release, they've talked about ending the life of 8, 9, and 10 IE and going with the Firefox Chrome type of model, where they have sort of that continuous improvement of one version of IE that's officially supported. So you see, we keep in step with that. We keep up with those trends. We oftentimes will carry our support over longer than what that's prescribed by, Apple or by Microsoft or whoever it might be. But it's important to note, you can get a hold of these internal builds. Make sure you toggle on this option. The official builds are more of a quarterly basis, which you can certainly wait for if you'd like to, but typically if you toggle this on, if you have check for updates on startup, you'll get it. You also see at the bottom here, it says your software's up to date. That's a note to let you know whether or not there's one ready to download or not, or you can hit check for updates now and get the latest. Okay. Also in here is where you can deactivate and activate your license. So if you need to move from machine to machine, you can do that easily, and or share it from person to person as well. All right, next up, we'll open up this project here. And feel free, I know our callers are muted throughout the call, but if you have questions along the way, please feel free to submit those through the chat panel or the questions panel on GoToWebinar. So here's a project that I've opened up. Lots of panels here that you can move around. We've got some presets for you up at the top. If you want to go high productivity, it'll adjust to that. Or if you want to save a custom layout, you can do that as well. As I like this one here. You can pin these back, you can dock and undock them. They're great, very easy to use panels. And this is a bit of dog fooding because Test Studio is a WPF application. These are our WPF dockable panels controls. So this is built by Telerik controls. And of course we use it very well with our controls as well as many others. But there's a real easy organization to things. You can create a folder structure that makes sense for you. You might have folders within folders. You've got lots of layers you can create here. We've recently updated this too to make sure it's easy to access the code behind files if you are doing some coded testing. So again, there's no limitations to that. You can see in the sort of built-in IDE segment here, again, Test Studio or Visual Studio is not even required because this is built into Test Studio. You can basically just start coding if you'd like. You've got some IntelliSense built in as well. It's highly useful. But again, there's 3 solutions before we get into this, because typically we can do things a lot easier than this, which requires less to maintain, less headache, and more control for the QA to own the process as well. So let's create a test. And before we do, just a couple of settings up on top. We've got the new features that have been added from the coding capabilities, the ability to compile, refresh here. There's an output panel as well. Again, some coding tools for you if you need them. But typical scenario here, if we jump into, there we go. We see that there's data sources that you can bring in. We'll talk about data-driven testing. This can allow you to data drive inputs as well as verifications. Every day I get the question, how do we verify what is in the database shows up on screen? Well, you can add your database, ODBC or OLEDB compliant data sources, as a live data source to your project, and then you can use those columns of data from your tables or even write a query to pull your data together from multiple tables or filter it or whatever. And you could drive your verifications on screen with data from your database. So that allows you to verify that what's in the database is showing up correctly on screen, and that's all done codelessly. We combine that to the test and so on and so forth. So lots of things that we can get out of the data-driven capabilities. We have the ability to connect up to scheduling server, which means we can have a centralized machine that essentially communicates and executes tests on other machines, on a lab environment essentially. And we'll show you a quick example of what that might look like, where you have representations on maybe virtual machines of different environments that might represent different versions of the browsers or whatnot. And you can have test lists running simultaneously across these runtime licenses, which is a very inexpensive license type for execution. It's really the Swiss Army knife of Test Studio and has a lot of capabilities. And there's many different ways in which we structure these lab environments. We'd be happy to go through some of this with you too if you have questions on what's going to work best for your particular team and structure internally. But be aware that that's there, and it's something that's very common, and that's when we connect to a scheduling machine, and we can maybe see status of those machines. what tests are being executed, if the profiler is doing anything, meaning that we might be running some load or performance tests on that machine, and the impact of that execution and so forth. So lots of great visibility into what our lab is doing and access to make sure we can get exponentially more results out of our tests. Source control integration, TFS out of the box. We also work with Git or SVN. Any flat file-based source control really will work with Test Studio. This allows for version control, allows for the check-in and check-out capability, the chain of custody, the conflict resolution, and this also invites the QA process to be an active participant in the application lifecycle. We're storing our tests centrally in a place where the code lives. We're making it easy for folks to access it, but we're also making sure that we've got the right version and that things are done in an organized way, that we have tracking of those files. All right. Now, other integrations really to point out, bug tracking. We work with these three out of the box. Just like our source control story, these aren't the only options. We've also got lots of bug tracking integrations that our customers have built, and you can also build your own custom bug tracking plugins as well through our documentation. We have it well documented, but I invite you to check out the forums if you have a specific tool that's not listed here for bug tracking. We'll show you where that process fits in. And then of course the settings. Now I showed you the screenshot of this. This is where this lives. This is where you can really tailor things depending on what's the best method for your application, the second best, the third best. And of course, we're going to show you some examples where we can handle some dynamic stuff as well. Translators and everything are in here. Recording options too. Just a note here on recording, this compare mode. I'd like to point this out because it can actually create some heartache if you don't have this set correctly. Compare mode looks at the page that you're recording your test on, compares it to the page that you're executing against. And if you're using full path inquiry, which I think is the default, full path inquiry can sometimes be too specific because it evaluates the page's URL and the query string that might be there. And if you think about a test against Google and we get to the Google results page, the Google results page on a search in Google has google.com/results ? Some long query string, right? That query string is guaranteed to change. Maybe not right away, but it will change at some point. And when it changes, your same test could fail if it's using full path inquiry to analyze and compare the pages because it's being too specific, right? So that's why I'd encourage you to use full path as a starting point. Base URL and title are also some basic options here, but full path is what I would typically prescribe. And I would say do this before you hit record for the first time. There's ways to clean up after the fact if you find duplicate pages are created or tests are failing for some reason. This is certainly something to check and try, but full path is a good way to go there. How do we interact with drop downs? You can do that at a test level or a project level, and really all these project settings are for you to be able to elevate things to the project level. Figure out trends within your application, how the application behaves, how Test Studio works with the application. So there is a phase of tuning these settings to work well with your application under test. A good example of that is simulating real clicks and real typing by default, and I'll show you a real example where that's going to come into play. So let's do that. We'll go get our testing started here now that we've gone on for half an hour here on settings and things like that, but it's of utmost importance. Having the right settings for the application gives you the biggest bang for your buck, the most reliability, and ultimately give you the best experience. So login test for end user. I'm just going to right click on this new test that I've added, hit record, and it's going to ask me which browser I want to record in. Now, as I mentioned, these are cross-browser tests, so we can record in any of these three browsers. Now, as support for Safari was deprecated on the PC, we dropped recording in Safari. We still execute against it though, so I can record a test in Chrome and execute it on Safari. You'll see that a little bit later, but I can record from any of these three and I can mix and match. If I need to, I can go get specific steps for Firefox or specific steps for Chrome. but I can mix it up. I can put things together as I need to. I'm going to start in IE. So pull up the browser for me and get us to our starting screen. And of course, that's on my other screen. I'm going to try to overlap and show both here. I will tell you this best use case is for you to have dual monitors. So you've got your recording browser on one screen and your Test Studio on another. At this point, I'm just going to drop in the URL, hit start recording, and this will navigate to our application under test, which in this case is a bit of a sample CRM, if you will. Let's see if it's awake this morning. And you can see in the background here, it's captured this navigate step. This is also where you can see the use of base URL. Now, base URL is one of our project level settings, which you can essentially preset so that it will recognize the URL that you're hitting. And if I go back here into the recording options, it's right here on top. I wanted to come back real quick to point out too, we've added some links throughout Test Studio as well as some notifications for you to learn and get access easily to the documentation on these topics. So keep that in mind when you see those links. It takes you right into our documentation here. Talks about base URL here, and there's an even more, and here it even talks about the compare mode, but there's an even more in-depth base URL article here that you can link to. So lots of great documentation, and that's what those links are about when you see those throughout the application there. But back to our recorder. Basically at this point, we're going with solution one, which is to hit record and do what a user would do. So I'm trying to capture a login process. I'll click login. You see it captures that click login step. We'll enter in a username, right? It captures that for me. Now, if I tab to this next key or this next field, it's going to capture that keyboard press, but I want to talk about that for a second. Record and playback is something, of course, we want to do what a user normally would do to some extent. When you're building test automation, it's hopefully the last time you ever have to do this manually because you're recording it. And the next time you need it, you can just execute it. But there are some things to consider, especially if you're coming from manual testing. There's some things that are different when you get into automation. Or if you're using other tools from an automation standpoint, there's different things that they do to cheat, I'd like to say, that we don't have to do. And this is one of them. Using a tab to go from field to field is a way for other tools to cheat, to say, hey, well, how do I get from this field? How do I find a field? Well, we'll just use a tab index to do that. We'll just hit tab 20 times until we get to that particular field. Well, that's fallible. That's fragile because the tab index is subject to change. It's something that oftentimes does as you're moving through the development of the application. So it's difficult to rely on tab index. The other thing is this step isn't very sophisticated. It's just exercising the keyboard, and it just knows it's starting at the username field. It has no idea where it's going. It just knows it's going to hit tab one time. Alternatively, what we do, we have everything we need in this next step to locate the password field, no matter where it's positioned on the screen. Locate the password field and input the password into it. So we don't need this step. This is an extra step. So as a best practice, you can avoid using keyboard presses. There are time and place for it, but very rarely is that used or needed within Test Studio. Some of you may be thinking grids, but I still have a better solution for you than doing this within a grid. This is position-based, index-based stuff, and we try to steer away from that because it's not reliable. So if you get into the situation and you don't know whether you need it or not, you can run your test without it. Disable the step, run the test without it. If you determine you don't need it, you can delete it. And guess what? I'm doing all this editing while I'm still in a live record mode. So you're encouraged to work back and forth between the recording browser and Test Studio. You can modify things, you can drill down into things. In fact, what we'll do next is go look at the elements that we're capturing. Because as we're capturing test steps here, we're also capturing the elements in this element repository down below. This is, by the way, where you'll see the page level and what type of compare mode is being used and the ability to modify that. So if you're stuck with full path and query and you want to go to full path, you can do that. It will rebuild and attempt to merge together any duplicate elements it may find. That can be done for pages for frames, and for the element level as well. And there's some great documentation on merging page nodes. Again, if you are looking for some answers to solving some of that pain, if you've already gotten yourself in that situation, real quick, I'm going to give a shameless plug for the help tab here. It's more than just what version am I using. Yes, that's in here, but it's also a place where you can get updates, enable logging. If you're interacting with our support team, they may ask for a log file. So this is where you can come to do that. This is where you could submit tickets. Try our support. It's part of the reason people go with Test Studio. It's really the number 2 reason that people get Test Studio is because it's a supported product with 24-hour guaranteed engineer level response time. And it's unlimited tickets, so submit tickets. You have support even throughout the trial. Our forums, our videos, our user guide. I was just accessing the user guide. You can click into that. It's searchable. If you search merge in here, you'll find merge page nodes, which talks about cleaning up dirty element repositories, right? All right, there's also lots of great forums in here, or other tools in there as well. So that's the help tab story there. So if you do need to clean up things, if you have duplicate elements you need to merge or something like that, you can certainly do that. Now let's get back to this test. When I click on a test step, you can see the element highlighter highlighting the element that corresponds to this test step. I can also right click on this and see where it's used by. So this is universal element maintenance. Every time we come across the same element, if we already have it in our repository, we will simply reuse that element. Now this is of course assuming that we are codeless. If we modify our test and edit it in code, we will lose this element maintenance, this centralized element maintenance. Keep that in mind. Sometimes you may want to go extend a test through code, and that's perfectly fine. You're not limited to a codeless test, but it is something that's a bit of a one-way operation. I can't go from a coded test to a codeless test. I can only go from codeless to coded, right? So we try to keep it as codeless as possible, and this is part of that process. When we need to modify this element, we can right-click on it. We can edit it in live, meaning I'm going to edit it against the live UI. Here you can see how it's being identified by its tag name, which is an input. So this is a very generic type of identifier that says what type of field is it? Is it an input? Is it a heading? Is it a div? Right? Is it a button? What type of input it is, but it's not too specific like a tag index. A tag index says input number 2, input number 3, right? An index is going to have a number to it to designate how many positions in to go. And that's really position or location based logic. But a generic tag name just says what type of field are we looking for? And then we combine that, and this is how we automatically scoop up the elements. There's nothing I did ahead of time to do this. It's just a matter of the logic in Test Studio saying what's the best method. In fact, if we play it out, when I was recording and I started to type into the username field, Test Studio said, first of all, it said, do we already have this element in our repository? Yes, we do. Okay, we'll just use the same one that we already have. But even if it's a brand new one, it will say, does this element have an automation ID? Does it have a UID? Does it have a text content or an inner text? It works its way down my list of prioritized attributes to look for, and it finds the values that exist for those, if one exists, and it will grab that. So it went all the way down my list to ID before it found something useful. The next in line is name. There's a useful name in this application, but this is where it's application specific and technology specific. Depending on the tech you're working with, there may be many different options. This is where you'll see in your Angular applications, your ng-whatevers, right? And those may be useful, reliable ways to locate elements. That's what you're looking for. In this case of a single element, I might be looking to fix one element, but I'm also looking for trends, especially in your first few tests you're building. If you fix an element one way, chances are the next time you need to fix an element, it'll probably be fixed the same way. If you identify, for example, that the name property is stronger than the ID property, maybe the IDs are dynamic, for instance, then I may use name instead. So you can swap out something that's more reliable and take away something that's less reliable, okay? And if that is a trend, if I'm continuing to fix my elements by using name instead of ID, well, guess what? You can go change that at the project level. Elevate that trend to the project level. It won't change anything you've previously done, but from that point on, when you hit record, it would then prioritize name over ID, and the next time we record, it would capture it via name before it tries to use the ID. Now, I've left both of these in here. Normally, I would take one away, but I want to show you how, if we are stuck with something dynamic, what happens, right? So what if we have this? You can see that this red is already kind of complaining because we're working against the live UI, and this is what Test Studio has found as suggestions. So this is my method that it chose automatically, and these are the backup methods from strongest to weakest. For those XPath lovers out there, yeah, you can use it. I don't know why you ever would. We're really putting XPath to death with Test Studio, I think, because it's really not reliable. Again, I'll show you some examples here in just a few minutes inside of a grid that are very powerful. But it is here if you wanted to use it. I would just challenge you, if you ever think you need it, give me a call. I'd be happy to tell you a better way to do it. And I may be wrong. I'm happy to be wrong. But let's plow through. We've got a dynamic ID in here now. I'll hit validate, and you'll see that it couldn't find the element. So it's using the backup search. When the prescribed search method fails, the backup search method kicks in. So name comes back still and says, hey, we found something. Oftentimes, in this case, a test will fail because it's not finding the element the way we told it to, but it will fail with suggestions because one of the backup methods was still valid. Okay. Now, if you're stuck with a dynamic ID and there's no other alternative, you can trim this and use a different operator like contains or starts with or a regular expression match or something like that. And that way it can continue to be a dynamic ID, but we only care as long as we can find it with a partial, ID that says username with the static portion there. All right. You can also get into the DOM. The first thing to do when you click the DOM tab is validate. That'll take you to that level of the DOM. And I forgot to show you that as I'm working with this tool, guess what? It automatically paused my recorder and turned on my element highlighter, and it's highlighting the element. If it's finding it, when I click validate here, it will highlight it on screen. So you have that great feedback to see if it's finding that. And I'll just take the focus away so you can see. I have to kind of flip screens here because I have it all on one monitor. But you can see that it continues to highlight that field because it is being found. Right. On the DOM tab, really the most technical part of Test Studio, it says a lot because it's a pretty low learning curve. We can move up layers. We can identify things. If I click on the DOM element layer here, you can see that it's highlighting that corresponding form level for me. If I need to, I can even replace one element for another. Here you can see it automatically using a chain defined expression from a parent to a child. Back on suggestions, you can see other things it brought back for us, things like inner text that can be very useful, and maybe that generic kind of tag name combination that you see used a lot. And I can make modifications here to locate things in a way that's consistent cross-browser over time, and even apply data to that if I need to data drive it. Okay. I can add layers here if I want to. If you can imagine going through this for a grid, I could use a grid level ID to a row level ID to a, I'm sorry, I didn't mean text content, but to a cell level ID. So there's lots of things that you can do with this type of format. Go ahead and hit validate here. You see it brought back other stuff for me. So it's a valid way to locate the password field. Now, this isn't all required, right? This is just an exercise to show you how flexible this is. This chaining will naturally happen, but you could customize it. But that's a way to locate the password field where I can differentiate it between maybe multiple login dialogues for different things that you could log into on the same page. I don't know, that sometimes could happen. So that's one way around that. I'm going to reset this back and show you probably one of the best benefits of the way we maintain our elements. And this screen right here, when I go to save the changes, it says, hey, well, by the way, this element is also being used in all of these other tests. So I can update it for the entire project, or I can deviate if I need to for a certain test, if I want to maybe identify something separately for one test versus another. All right, so that side trip we did while we still have this live recorder. So I can just hit resume recording, turn off my element highlighter, click login, and I'm still building test. So you're encouraged to stay in this live record mode. You also have tools like on this right click menu here, run to a certain step, run from a certain step, run this selected step or group of steps here on the live UI. Now this test isn't done. We are logged into this application, but we need something else. And again, if you're coming from manual testing, this is something that may not appear to you originally, because in a manual testing world, when I get to this point, I say, yep, it's logged in fine, everything works, let's move on to the next case. Well, in the automation world, we want these tests to run while we're asleep, so they may need a little bit of extra incentive or help to do that. In this case, this test can yield a false positive. It doesn't matter what username or password combination I use, this test will pass because it's only getting to the point where it clicks submit. So we need a verification here to prove that we've succeeded at logging it. And those verifications come by way of our element highlighter. So we can toggle on our element highlighter, we can float over the elements that make up this page, and here you can see on this generic grid, our generic HTML translator is kicking in and recognizing that this is a cell that lives inside of a row, that lives inside of a table. There's just a lot of smarts built into this. And this is just a generic grid. You should see this on a Kendo grid. It's insane. But even on a generic grid, you have column and row, if I can get to that level. Sorry, I keep moving my mouse the wrong way. Column and row count. You can even data drive that if you expect it to continue to grow. Maybe if you have tests that are adding records, next iteration I might be looking for the table to have 70 rows and 71 and so forth. We've got weights to make sure we have the right timing built in. We have extracts so we can pull data from the UI. If I wanted to take benzene here from the UI, I could use extract to create a variable out of that and then plug it in somewhere else if I want to. Okay. For this test, we're going to just verify that log out shows up under quick steps. And if we need more verifications, these are mostly our functional verifications. Did we succeed at logging in? If log out shows up, then we've succeeded at logging in. If I want to make sure that the log out link up here is the right font, is the right display options and color, then I go to build step. So this is that build step I mentioned where we invoke the toolbar below, and here we have content verification options, attributes here for different levels, stylistic options as well, like font or color, text, display. So all those things are here. We can even do pixel level image comparison. Okay, so this is a lot more capabilities, kind of advanced stuff, but always at the ready. Within the quick steps, you have the most common kind of functional verifications that say, did we get to what we wanted? Did log out show up correctly? All right, I'm going to kill this test and run it back. We'll save that, and we'll run it on Safari. So we recorded on IE, we'll execute on Safari in this case. Now here, this is what we call quick execution. It's the ability to basically bench test this, run it back real quick and see how it's working. It went very quickly to step 6 down here. I could pause and work with the application. I can also set up some auto pause debugger options if I need to. But it did come back with a failure, right? And it basically shows me we passed 5 out of 6. So we got to this verification. Now keep in mind, if I hadn't had this verification on the end, this test would have yielded a false positive. So it's important to have those verifications. In fact, I would probably need to add even more verifications to this test to make it a sound test. But let's look at the failure details. If we double click on this red X, we see all this data that's here for the QA to review to say, is this something I can fix myself or something I need help with? Is this a test issue or is this an application issue? It tells me it was unable to locate the element, the one it was looking for, and the way it was looking for it was the log out link. It was looking for it based off its tag name combined with its text content. Couldn't find it that way. Guess what though? A backup search method yielded some solution. Guess which one? It was XPath. It found something for us. And this is going to show you in a moment just how quote unquote reliable XPath is. This is sort of the pat on the head for XPath. Good job, XPath. But you'll see what it brought us. Below we've got a complete test log. Here's our steps to reproduce the issue, the browser and version we ran against, the step that failed here, some of that failure information as well, the time it took to execute that test, all there for us. We have an exception log that was captured too. We also have an images tab that shows us the expected state that was captured during our recording process automatically. And it shows us that we were expecting to verify logout. And our failed state on the left, where you can see that we actually failed to get logged in. We didn't make it to the right page. In fact, if we look closely, we can see login is grayed out. So there's some great evidence for us on that screen. There's some things that we really need to dive into. But ultimately, I need to back up in my test. I need to work from this failure, which is supposed to be on this screen, and put something in place on this screen before we actually try to get to this one. So this is where I'm going to tease out the failure a little bit. Also in the failure details, we capture the page DOM at the point of failure so you can inspect what was going on behind the scenes when that failure occurred. And the resolve failure is assuming that we have a test issue and we're gonna fix that test issue. So the resolve failure tab may be different depending on the type of failure. In this case, since it failed to locate the element, the solution prescribed here is to fix the broken element. Now we know from looking at the images that we can't blame the find logic for the logout link because we never made it to that page. So again, we're gonna have to back up in this test a little bit and see what led up to that. But I wanna show you at least what the XPath brought, what the backup search brought to us. And sometimes this is a very, very powerful solution. In this case, it rolled all the way down my find logic list until XPath said, hey, I got something. And you know what it did? It did what XPath does. It went to a certain spot on the screen and it said, I think I found something. Because all of those stronger methods didn't find something, which was legitimate because it really wasn't there, but XPath says I found a login link. Well, we weren't looking for the login link. We were looking for the logout link, but thanks XPath. Even when this happens, and sometimes it does provide a valid solution, but even when it happens, I don't use XPath to repair this. I use XPath to go get me all the stronger stuff here that may be more reliable. But again, this is not the solution in this case. We never made it to that page. We can't blame the logic. We may have to submit this as a bug. Maybe this is an application issue, right? This is also where we can export it to a zip file and attach it to a support ticket if you need our help. Our support guys love to get failure details just like your developers will, because it provides them all of the data they need to know what are you expecting to happen and what did you do and what did it look like. All that stuff's captured for you. So I can hit submit bug, push that into the bug tracking system. If I've changed the element, I have the ability right here to update all of the tests that element affects as well. So we got one more minute to make this test work. So I'm going to real quickly add an additional verification. We already have a test that uses the login button. I want to verify that the login button is enabled prior to clicking the login button. So how do I do that? I can go back in the recorder and add that verification with the element highlighter. But since I already have the element, I can use their step builder, which is packed full of all sorts of really awesome things. Things like test to step that allows us to call tests from within other tests. Things like browser clearing, cache clearing kind of options, annotations, maximize browser captures. We got conditional logic, if else and while loop and dialog handlers. There's just an amazing amount of stuff that's built in here for you. I just simply want to verify that the element is enabled. So I'll add that step in. And I'm going to take this step and drag and drop it right above the click step. So we'll make sure it's enabled, then we'll click it. Let's run this back really quickly here. I'm actually going to run it back with annotation turned on, another clue for you. And by the way, I would say set your wait on elements to 10 seconds. This is defaulted to 30. But save yourself some pain. If you fail quickly. So I would reduce that down just for your own sanity. But we'll run this back. If this fails, it should fail more quickly now. We're teasing out the failure, adding verifications to check for those things. We're getting closer to the culprit that may be causing this situation. And with the element highlighter turned on, I can inspect this a little bit more easily. login button still was grayed out. So I'm going to go back up to this next step. Here's what's going on. This is now, in my mind, a false positive. And sometimes we'll have test steps that yield a false positive. We talked about it at the test level. Now we're at the particular test step that I think is causing this situation. And this is something that you're going to come across. This is a case where Test Studio says we did what you told us to, but when we see the application under test during execution, it's not behaving the way we think it should, right? And the case is that the login button remains disabled, which is telling me we're not interacting with the fields correctly. The first thing to try here is simulate real typing. Usually what this case is showing me is that there's a JavaScript handler there, and the JavaScript handler doesn't really see our type of DOM injection. And a DOM injection is essentially like taking this and copying and pasting it as one string into that field. Well, that doesn't activate the JavaScript handler. But if I was to type in each character like a real user, that should initiate that and enable that login button. So this is a simple checkbox at a step level, but I'm also looking for this to be a trend. Am I going to repair other test steps the same way? And how widespread is that? If need be, I can elevate this setting to the project level so I don't have to do it at a step level. We defaulted off for efficiency gain, but you can certainly default it on for both typing and click steps. But now I expect this test should pass. And as you see the password step here, you'll recognize a type in each character. This is where we're going to wrap it up. I know we spent an hour on one test, but this is a foundational test. This is a test you're going to be able to use in most of your cases that require A, login, and B, go do something else, because this is now a nice modular login process that can work across browser for me that I can use in this next test here. We'll call this update contact really quickly. To begin this next test, I'm going to essentially jump in, go to my common test to step option here. We'll go login, test for end user, and now I just grab that and I have a dynamic call to go log into the application, and then I'll just simply record what happens after that on top of that. So you can really modularize these things. Test to step allows you to do a lot of great things with that. And there's tons more to cover, but of course we're out of time. I'll take a couple questions if there's any folks that are interested in asking them. I'll hang on for a few more minutes, but that's about it for today's session. Come back on Thursday if you'd like to see performance and load testing this week. We're alternating our Thursday sessions between performance and load and mobile. So if you want to see mobile testing, check us out next Thursday, and that's on our webinars page if you want to sign up for that. And always, our Tuesday session will be somewhere similar to this. Sometimes we'll go into greater details, but again, any questions that you may have, I'm happy to answer those at this point. Otherwise, thanks for taking a look at Test Studio. Remember to reach out to us, use our support, trial our support as you trial our product. Reach out to your sales folks if you have questions, if you'd like to set up private demonstrations, if you have questions about pricing or promotions that we may have. Those guys are great, and they can get you in touch with all the right people if you need to have any additional sessions or questions answered as well. Thanks a lot. That'll be it for me today. Have a great day, and thanks again for taking a look at Test Studio.